Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing my top 10 favourite books for fiction for 2020. These are in no particular order. I have not attempted to kind of rank them as my like 10 to number 1. I really can't do that with my reading, and there are probably other ones that deserve honourable mentions, but it was just too hard to make this list in general, so we're just going to dive in and go for these books. The first one I wanted to talk about is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a lovely kind of like very soft sci-fi book that is a series of kind of little vignettes of different characters at this particular cafe. And at this cafe, if you sit in a very particular seat and you drink a very particular cup of coffee, you can actually go back in time to witness a particular event that will have happened in that cafe. Now you cannot leave the seat and you must come back to the to the present day before the coffee goes cold, hence the title, but you have the opportunity to observe some kind of interaction occurring, and it's basically because of that lovely series of different kind of watching relationships and kind of people finding peace about what has happened with various different people in their lives. It's the kind of wonderful, beautiful, like quiet commentary on the beauty of humanity kind of book that I think a lot of Japanese literature does very, very well. And it was one of the first books I read of the year, and it just really was perfect in that moment for something like cozy and comfy and glorious. And I have the sequel, which I haven't read yet, and I'm very excited for it. The next book I wanted to talk about is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. This is such a glorious sci-fi novella. It's also a time travel book. Time travel features very heavily on this list, and it's about an intergalactic, interdimensional time traveling battle between two warring factions and kind of rival agents ending up falling in love. It's one of these weird sci-fi books that is not interested in trying to like explain any of its real world building. It kind of throws you in at the deep end and leaves you to it, but it was lyrical and beautiful and glorious, and it's just such like fun with the words of it. And for me, it also really helped to reinvigorate my love of sci-fi and remind me how much I really enjoy kind of quirky, weird sci-fi that is not interested in explaining its rules particularly to its reader and just wants you to kind of pick it up as you go along. And I think this is a perfect example of that genre. This one has been very well received, and I can totally see why. It's fantastic, and it was such a spur of the moment pick for me, which I do find often, like when I'm not expecting a book to be quite as good, they're far more likely to end up on a favourites just because it's kind of one of these out of the blue surprises. But it was just absolutely beautiful, and I would totally recommend it if you are a fan of sci-fi. Sticking with our time travel theme, because why not, we also have The Psychology of Time Travel by Mascarenhas. This is at its heart primarily a murder mystery, but it's doing a lot of different things, and it is set in a world where 4 women scientists discover time travel in the 60s, and it's about the kind of bureau that forms because of that, who use this power to kind of build airtight cases against various criminals, not to like try and stop the crimes happening in like a Minority Report kind of way, but rather to make sure that justice is sought. It's got a whole sort of conversation about institutions and hazing. There's this murder mystery, there's all sorts of identity stuff, but the thing that I really appreciated about this book was just how tight the time travel kind of system was and how thought through it was. And it has whole conversations about how like wages and taxation would work if you were a time traveler for a living, and like how linguistics, sort of the slang words, end up being infiltrated through, and like what is it like to work in an institution where everything is already known because you can bounce around in a timeline, because you can't go back before the 1960s. You can only travel within the timeline where time travel has been invented. So I really love that constraint on it. I thought all the characters were fantastic. The plot is great as well, but like the world building is just impeccable, and I adored it. Sticking with a kind of sci-fi theme, but going off on a slightly different tangent, we are now moving away from time travel. We have Qualityland by Marc Uwe-Kling. This is kind of an extension of the idea of our kind of algorithm-based surveillance state that we currently live in, and it's a world where everything is entirely dictated by algorithms and by computers and sort of social media-esque stuff. So the job you have is dictated by the information that the system knows about you, the person that you're dating. Like, you don't buy anything anymore, things just get sent to you that they think that you'll like. And it's a kind of story about that, and also about artificial intelligence in general. We follow 3 sort of main threads. We have kind of a down and out worker who's a bit disgruntled. We have the first artificial intelligence presidency candidate who is running for the presidency and sort of following his particular campaign. And then we have one of his aides and sort of campaign managers who is also very disgruntled. It's a fun, weird, wonderful world that is both so overtly clever with what it's doing, but also so like sort of subtly clever and really implicitly clever about all sorts of commentary that it's making on our current world and sort of the road that we can end up going down. It also has the whole like AI, what does it mean to be a person conversation going on, which I adore in my fiction. So many books that do that potentially could have made it onto this list. It was quite hard to narrow that one down, but I think that this is the best at what it's doing in terms of making a commentary on our world, and is also a rip-roaringly good tale at the same time. The next two I'm going to talk about are entire trilogies, and I think that still counts, but one of them is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It starts with the 5th season, and this is the most comprehensive world building I have ever seen in a fantasy. It might now be my all-time favourite fantasy series ever. It was that good. It is set in a world where the elements are really are very volatile. There's lots of natural disasters, and there are people who have the ability to kind of control these elements, but it is about the way that society has abused them due to their power and kind of controlled them in various different ways. The first book follows 3 different women who are kind of interacting with this abuse in different ways, and then we kind of continue on from there, and I don't want to say too much more, but it's so clever, and it's so hard to articulate how clever it actually is in terms of how it is doing its world building on a really like genuinely foundational, the basic elements and kind of features of the world from a geological perspective, and how that then has implications for the society and the kind of civilizations that have evolved within it. It is so clever and so incredible and really just dark and gritty and amazing, and I am so excited to read more from N.K. Jemisin this year. Veering off into historical fiction, a kind of spur of the moment pick that ended up being absolutely phenomenal was The Summer Queen, or rather the Eleanor of Aquitaine trilogy by Elizabeth Chadwick. This is tracking Eleanor of Aquitaine's reign, and she was a real human being who was the Queen of France at one point and Queen of England at another point throughout her kind of life, and it's about her various husbands, her children, and the various kind of political movements and sort of machinations that she was involved in her reign. It's written in the 1100s, and it's set in the 1100s, and it is looking at all the things going on within the 1100s between the kind of battles between France, or what was France at the time, and England, and also kind of various political and religious things going on, and sort of the Crusades, and just generally I really enjoyed it. It's that wonderful blend of historical fiction where it's historical fiction based on a genuinely real person and does follow her life very faithfully, and it also has some wonderful sections at the back where it talks about what the author decided to change, what the author decided to keep, and kind of issues with finding sources about this woman. I also listened to all of it on audiobook, and the narrator is phenomenal. It's really fun, and is a great like alternative to a lot of the very kind of Victorian heavy or like World War II heavy historical fiction that I do tend to gravitate towards. An entire author who I absolutely fell in love with in 2020, although I do have kind of a favourite book at the moment, is John Wyndham. So this is the Chrysalids, but I've read 4 of his books now, and I literally started 5th last night, and he is a fairly iconic classic sci-fi writer from the 50s and 60s. The Chrysalids is about a world where some kind of nuclear event has happened, and it's about several hundred years afterwards, and kind of the reimaginings of this society where some of the people have all these kind of quirks that they've developed, but they're considered to be like religious aberrations, and they need to be kind of wiped out in some sort of way. The book is the kind of book that at the beginning you don't really understand what is different about the world, and you slowly get little chunks of this world building piece by piece through like conversation between the characters and like the religious texts and the terminology used for various different things, and I really enjoyed it. I actually read this to my parents on Zoom at the very beginning of the first lockdown, and it was a wonderful kind of reading experience in general, kind of bonding experience between me and my parents. But I will say that John Wyndham is just flawless in general. Like I said, read 4 of his, I think they're amazing. The Midwich Cuckoos is a close second to this one. I'm reading The Kraken Wakes right now, and it's great so far. Just top quality all round. Another classic that I deeply enjoyed is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. Daphne du Maurier is like the queen of Gothic literature, and this one is about a gentleman who his uncle ends up marrying this woman who then he kind of sends a letter back home being like, I think I'm being poisoned, and then he does then mysteriously die, and this woman then moves into this house, and it's about kind of her relationship with our narrator and sort of the, is she suspicious or isn't she, the infatuation that the narrator develops, this whole like little twists here or there, sort of not knowing her motivations and sort of what is happening, all set in this like glorious backdrop of a super gothic spooky house in sort of the early 1900s, I believe, and just absolutely phenomenal. I really like Daphne du Maurier. I loved Rebecca that I read 2 years ago, and I'm super excited to read more, but I definitely think I enjoyed this one more. It was just so spooky and atmospheric, and it kept me really on the edge of my seat. And also there's a movie with Sam Claflin and Rachel Weisz in it that is fantastic as well. I would totally recommend that you go watch that. But this is just, oh, spooky gloriousness in all of the ways. An audiobook reading experience that I thought was absolutely phenomenal is World War Z by Max Brooks. This one I would heavily recommend specifically on audiobook, because the whole book is made up of like transcripts and interviews, and it's really that particular kind of style of writing that I think works so well in audio form. It is about, it's kind of a horror zombie book where there has been a zombie kind of uprising, and it is looking 20 years on after this big zombie event has happened that has kind of wiped out sort of the majority of the world, and it's looking at like the military responses to it, the sort of various countries' responses and political responses to it, how the people on the ground responded to it, and this kind of world war to take back the planet from the zombies. It was harrowing and so intense and just so realistic. And again, I listened to it sort of early lockdown and in the wake of the pandemic, and kind of seeing how various people are responding to coronavirus. It is very fascinating to then see it obviously with this zombie parallel. Naturally, World War Z is much more dramatic because, as far as I'm aware, nobody who caught COVID-19 is raising from the dead and trying to eat anybody, so that's good. But it was really interesting to see the parallels, and I just thought it was such a realistic look at a zombie invasion and was just fantastic. It's a subgenre, two kind of different subgenres that I really enjoy coming together, that like transcript form of an audiobook and the zombie story in general. Going off on a completely different genre now, I absolutely adored Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. I got really into contemporary romance in 2020. It was a new foray for me. I haven't really read any romance in a very, very long time, and I was never a contemporary romance fan, but I definitely enjoyed myself far more than I was expecting, and I read way more than I was definitely expecting to, and this one has stood out. There were a couple of other titles that I definitely enjoyed, but for me this is the best fake dating trope I have ever read. It is about the son of a kind of scandalous rock star who is always in the tabloids for making a mess of his life, and he's trying to like clean up his act and turn himself around, and he's involved with a local charity, but the kind of head of that charity said, like, you have a bad press image, we need you to bring along a kind of stable boyfriend to our next benefit so that you don't scare off potential donors. So he creates this fake dating agreement with a friend of a friend who is very straight-laced, prim, proper, very put together gentleman, and it's about the two of them kind of opening up to each other and changing each other's lives. It was just beautiful and amazing, and just the, like I said, the best fake dating trope ever. I really, really enjoyed it. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 from 2020. It was such a difficult list to pick, and I'm sure if you gave me the list of books that I read in 2020 next week and said pick 10, there would be 10 entirely different ones, because it's just so hard to try and like pick of all the different genres that I read what I really enjoyed in that moment. But it was a phenomenal reading year, mainly because I was functionally unemployed for 3 months, so got a lot of time to read. 2021 has been off to a slower start for me with my reading, but I have been enjoying a few of the things I've been picking up, so hopefully there'll be a 5-star read in there soon. Have you read any of these? Any of them on your TBR? Did you not like any of them? Do you disagree with my labelling them as favourites? Let me know everything in the comments down below. Have a wonderful reading week, and I will chat to you soon. Bye!